Karina was completely bewildered by this sudden confession. Her facial expression perfectly illustrated what it means to be utterly baffled. Carlos quickly realized the inappropriateness of his words and hastily changed the subject to the flute melody he had just played. "The melody I just played was improvised after seeing you paint. What do you think? Did you like it?" Karina was shocked, her mouth agape. Such a moving melody created on the spot. That's truly amazing. Hearing Karina's praise, Carlos smiled with great joy. "But speaking of which, Karina, now you can return to the Duke's mansion through this door, right?" "Yes, just open it, and that's it." Hearing this definite answer, Carlos couldn't help but marvel. This skill is truly close to being divine. I wonder what her family was thinking when their daughter is so exceptional. Why would they show no concern for her, he wondered. Opening the door, they arrived at Karina's room in the Duke's mansion. Upon entering, Carlos couldn't help but exclaim, "Is this an unused room in the mansion? There's not even a decent piece of furniture." Looking at the room exactly as she had left it, Karina gave a self-mocking smile. "This is the room I used to live in, but I don't blame Duke Carlos for thinking that. Ladies' rooms are usually very luxurious. My sister Abelia's room is like that. Her room has many lace decorations and even the curtains are colorful. Because I always had to take care of my younger siblings before, I never had time to visit other people's homes. I guess other ladies' rooms probably look like that too," she said sadly. Looking at the dust piled up in the room from lack of cleaning, Karina abandoned the idea of leaving the letter here. If she left it here, they'd probably never find it. The servants outside were pacing back and forth. If they discovered her, it would be trouble. Upon learning this, Carlos waved it off. "No problem, I can help you with this." He picked his flute and started playing a tune. Ever since their daughter ran away, the once loving Leopold family had begun to fall apart. The Duke and his wife grew distant, no longer speaking to each other. Abelia has become listless, consumed by sadness. Pelton stayed silent, and Infridge stopped coming home altogether. The maids in the mansion were suffocated by the oppressive atmosphere. Just as they hoped Karina would return to end it all, a melodious flute sound drifted from Karina's room. The maids, who had been buzzing with gossip, suddenly grew drowsy upon hearing the music. Soon everyone in the mansion who heard the sound fell into a deep sleep. The one behind this was Carlos. He had used the flute's melody to hypnotize everyone in the mansion, ensuring Karina wouldn't be discovered. She went to place the letter in her father's study. Upon her return, Duke Carlos asked Karina if there was anyone she wanted to see before going back. Her answer, of course, was no. No one had ever cared about her in this house. Even if Duke Carlos had told her father about her terminal illness, Karina knew her father would never believe it. Instead, he'd assume she was faking it just to hurt them. Unless she died right in front of him, he might feel regret, but even then he'd likely fly into a rage, berating her corpse for not speaking up sooner and causing her parents grief. So Karina had long given up on familial love. Now she just wanted to sever ties with her unloving parents as soon as possible. In the past, she had lived only for her family, assisting to her rarely home eldest brother, yielding to her pampered younger brother, caring for her chronically ill younger sister, and even performing various duties for her parents. But now she was determined to say goodbye to that version of herself. In the limited time she had left, she would live only for herself. With her unparalleled talent, she would make a name for herself as the painter Karina, leaving her works behind in this world. When her father saw the letter, he didn't recognize it at first. The handwriting on the letter felt vaguely familiar. Only when he read the line, "I'm sick, so I won't be returning to the Duke's mansion," did he realize it was from Karina. After his last letter scolding her, he hadn't expected her to reply with such finality. The letter continued. "From now on, I won't live as Karina Leopold. I'll make a name for myself simply as Karina. Just watch, one day the name you once saw as worthless will echo from the distant north all the way to the central lands where you reside. You always told me not to bring shame to the family. I've upheld that perfectly, so this time I hope you'll remember your own words when the time comes. Don't you dare tarnish my reputation. Before, my life revolved only around family, but I realized you never truly cared. Now I've met someone who genuinely loves me. I'm experiencing the thrill of a crush. You know what? Because of him, I've learned so much. My life doesn't have to revolve around family. He gave me the courage and confidence to live boldly as myself. He would never scold me or threaten to kick me out as a twisted way of showing love. Only after meeting him did I understand that love is gentle. So from now on, we have no relationship left." The Duke was furious, cursing Karina as an ungrateful wretch, but as he read further, his anger turned to shock. "I bet, after reading this, you're furious, calling me a thankless child. But let me ask you, did you ever truly listen to me? Was I really the quiet, obedient child who never cried?" When the Duke read these words, his mind flooded with fragmented memories of Karina's childhood and his recollection. She had always been smiling. He tried piecing together when she had stopped crying in front of him, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember. It wasn't that Karina hadn't told him, it was that the words she spoke he had never truly listened. Years of neglect had become sharp shards, leaving Karina bleeding and broken. Oh, and if you ever want to see me again, come to the north. I won't be returning. As for my funeral, do whatever you want. The Duke exploded in rage, shouting orders at the butler. Contact Duke Miran immediately, have him send that brat back at once. But my lord, the north is in the midst of winter. Monsters are rampant. No one can enter or leave easily. I don't care that child dares to claim she's terminally ill, and she even told us to handle her own funeral ourselves. Tell me, is that something a daughter should say to her parents? The butler hesitated. Oh my lord, have you considered that Miss Karina might truly be ill? The Duke paused mid-sip of his drink. What, you believe her too? The butler quickly explained. Months ago the maids had reported hearing vomiting sounds from Karina's room. What, why wasn't I informed? Duke was shocked. The butler grimaced. I did report it, but you were busy with work. You said she was healthy and not to bother you with such matters, and even told me never to report such matters to you again. You told me she was grown and could handle it herself. Butler replied, hanging his head. The Duke's face paled. You should have insisted. He panicked. For the first time doubt crept in. Was it possible he'd been wrong? Was Karina really sick? But if so, why didn't she tell him directly? Why hide it and run off to the north alone? Was this her way of shaming the family to spite him? Finally, the Duke ordered. Don't let Abelia find out. Her health is fragile. This would destroy her. But unbeknownst to him, Abelia was already outside, having overheard everything. Her beloved sister was terminally ill, nearing death, and all this time her sister had been suffering in silence at home. She never realized that behind Karina's constant smiles lay so much pain. Regret overwhelmed her. Why had she been so selfish? Now she might never get the chance to apologize. Helpless, she collapsed by the bed, sobbing, Sister, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Meanwhile, oblivious to it all, Karina stared at a worn-out teddy bear wallet. It was the only birthday gift her mother had ever given her. Once her most treasured possession, but now it meant nothing. She once again used her power. She painted a bird yearning for freedom. Let it follow its own will carry this last tie to her family to a place she'd never find it. Now she was truly free of the Leopold name. One afternoon, Karina and Miran were enjoying tea together. It should have been their sweet moment alone until Carlos showed up, turning it into a trio. Miran was deeply displeased with Carlos for intruding on his private time with Karina. Even if Karina had invited him, he couldn't shake his irritation. Couldn't his best friend take a hint? So he took his frustration out on Carlos. Every word from Carlos was met with a sharp retort from Miran. Back and forth they went until their childish bickering ruined the peaceful atmosphere. Watching the two act like petulant children, Karina couldn't help but laugh. The two dukes froze. Karina, why are you laughing? Do we amuse you? Still giggling, she shook her head. No, it's just I like seeing how close you two are, and I love this eating together, talking freely. Laughter filling the room. This is what I've always wanted. Seeing her smile, Miran's anger melted away. Then he had a thought. That infuriating Duke Carlos wasn't quite so unbearable after all. As days passed, Karina's condition worsened. To avoid worrying those who cared for her, she'd lock herself away when the pain struck, enduring it alone. Back home no one would have noticed, but here in the Duke Miran's mansion, there were people who genuinely loved and cared for her. So when Karina secluded herself, the servants quickly grew suspicious. They found her collapsed on the floor, barely conscious from the agony, and immediately stepped forward to inquire about Karina's condition. Yet Karina didn't want to trouble those who cared for her. She still forced a smile and said she was fine, but the maid ultimately insisted on notifying Dr. Winston. Because this was something Duke Miran emphasized every day. If Miss Karina showed any signs of discomfort, they must notify Dr. Winston immediately. Soon Dr. Winston arrived at Karina's room. After a thorough examination, he learned that Karina's heart disease had worsened compared to before, but fortunately it wouldn't deteriorate rapidly in the short term. This was currently the only good news, but Karina didn't care about that. She only cared whether she would continue to vomit frequently, because she didn't want Miran to see her in distress, making him worry. But Winston told her that the vomiting symptoms might persist, and he earnestly admonished Karina not to stop eating because of concerns about vomiting. Your body now is like a damaged sand castle being battered by surging waves. Once you stop eating, the structure of this castle will loosen and eventually collapse, and you must remember it's essential to have a firm will to live on, to have hope for survival. He tried to motivate her. Hearing this, Karina couldn't help but fall into memories once when she learned she had a terminal illness and would soon die. She didn't find it frightening, but instead felt incredibly relieved because she finally had a reason to escape this suffocating family so back. Then she chose to travel alone, hoping to quietly die in a place where no one knew her, but now she was different here. She had met people who truly loved and cared for her. Here she had someone she liked, she had goals she needed to accomplish, so now she was reluctant to die, she wanted to strive to live on. Seeing that Karina had regained a normal person's desire to live, Dr. Winston couldn't help but recall when he first met Karina. At that time, when Karina learned she had a terminal illness and would soon die, she didn't show a trace of fear. Instead, her whole being was filled with a sense of relief and longing. This situation was unimaginable even for him, a doctor used to all sorts of life and death partings, a person who had no fear of death whatsoever, but instead felt incredibly liberated and relieved. What exactly had she experienced in her life for her to be like that? But thankfully Karina had now kindled hope for life, so Dr. Winston left the remaining matters to Carlos. Carlos was more knowledgeable about the art disease. He explained to Karina about the taboos related to the art disease. Several days ago, after Carlos had watched Karina use the power of miracles, he had a thought lingering in his mind. In comparison to the way Karina used the miracle power, Karina's condition was deteriorating at an abnormal speed. According to the generations of knowledge passed down in Duke Carlos's family, the creators who used miracles had short lives because they created miracles too many times. But even so, those who used miracle powers more times than Karina still lived longer than Karina does now. So Carlos's purpose this time was mainly to ask Karina if she knew about the absolute taboos that cannot be violated when using miracle powers. However, facing this question, Karina naturally didn't know, therefore Carlos felt even more sympathetic towards Karina's situation. If only Karina hadn't grown up in an environment where she was neglected by her family, her body definitely wouldn't be in such a terrible state. If only her parents had paid a little more attention to her and hired a doctor knowledgeable about the art disease for Karina, her physical condition wouldn't have deteriorated to such an irreversible stage. Although it was a bit late now, Carlos thought it was still better to let Karina know, so he told Karina about the absolute taboos that must not be violated regarding the art disease. Simply put, take doctors for example. Although a doctor can heal and save lives due to the doctor's limited medical skills, he cannot treat severely injured patients. This is his limit, and for those who can willfully exceed limits, they are violating the taboos. Among them, there are 3 taboos that must never be touched. First one, cannot violate the laws of nature, for instance, bringing the dead back to life or making time flow backward to change things that have already happened. And the second point is that one cannot create humans, although your miracle can create plants, animals, even magical beasts. Only God can create humans, and we absolutely cannot try to become God. Then the most important point is that one must never use miracles to take a life, because miracle ability is almost omnipotent power, which means those who use miracles cannot do things humans shouldn't do. Once someone violates these, the price is one's own life. So Karina, have you violated any of these taboos? He asked. Faced with Carlos's inquiry, Karina nervously swallowed, then with a guilty expression indicated she hadn't violated these taboos. However, Carlos didn't notice these small gestures, because if Karina had truly violated a taboo, she certainly wouldn't have lived until now. But this way he still couldn't understand why Karina's condition was deteriorating so rapidly, and it was precisely because of this thought that he didn't notice when he mentioned the second taboo, that one cannot create humans. Karina's entire body trembled. If Miran, who understood Karina better, were here, he would definitely have discovered that Karina had lied again. Finally, Carlos temporarily stopped his contemplation and offered Karina a method to alleviate her condition, that is to have Karina stop painting at the last step before completion, because if the painting is stopped before completion, then the miracle cannot be activated. This way it could satisfy Karina's need to paint while preventing miracles from happening and weakening her body. Lastly, Carlos gave Karina some advice. He requested Karina to give him those unfinished paintings. As per Karina's wish, he would make Karina into a unique and famous painter. Let Karina's name resound throughout this land. Let those family members who once neglected her see how extraordinary their ordinary second daughter really was. At night, Karina, having received knowledge about miracle powers, was alone in the moonlight thinking of Miran, who had left several days ago to subdue magical beasts rampaging near the territory and had not returned. This made Karina a bit worried. Could he have encountered danger? But as soon as this thought appeared, Karina shook her head. He will definitely be fine. To distract herself, she once again took out that last wishes notebook and began to write thanks to Carlos. Now her wish to make friends had been fulfilled, so next was to give a gift to her beloved and to embrace her beloved. But when Karina imagined the scene of passionately embracing Miran, she couldn't help but blush, hurriedly waving her hands to dispel those thoughts from her mind. And just as Karina was fighting with the thoughts in her mind, Miran had already entered her room. He had returned to the Duke's mansion before Karina started daydreaming, but when he stood outside Karina's room and knocked for a long time without response, he took it upon himself to enter to check on her. Miran, who was originally worried that Karina might have fainted, upon seeing Karina's shy appearance in the moonlight, his worried emotions instantly transformed into deep love. She's really adorable, but when he heard Karina mention Carlos's name, he was suddenly alarmed. Something wasn't right. This is probably what love looks like at its most beautiful. When I'm thinking of you, you appear before my eyes at the first moment, and our first words upon meeting must certainly be concerned for each other. Although Karina and Miran had only been apart for 2.5 days, both felt as they had been apart for years, and due to the winter's arrival, magical beasts' rampage has increased, decreasing the already limited time for the two to be together. After just a few words, Miran had to set off again. This made Karina, who had just seen him, very reluctant to part. They had just met, and now they had to separate again. In order not to make Karina sad, Miran promised that he would return the day after tomorrow by evening, but when he looked up and saw Karina's pitiful gaze, he immediately changed his words, setting the return time to noon. But after he said it, he felt a bit regretful. Even at his fastest, he could only return in the evening, saying, "No, wasn't that a lie?" But the next second he widened his eyes in shock because Karina said, "Under the dazzling starry sky, I will wait for you." And this sentence, as if it had a magical power, prompted the Duke to set off overnight. He was eager to finish his work and return, but the knights following him couldn't keep up with his pace. "Your Grace, you're moving too fast. The knights are having trouble keeping up." But the Duke was unconcerned. "You can't handle this much," he retorted and took the lead. "I'll lead the way up front, you just follow behind me," he shouted as he recalled the image of Karina smiling under the moonlight, saying she would wait for him. "Don't worry, Karina, no difficulty can prevent my return on time," he thought as he increased his speed resolutely. Soon the group arrived at their destination. Miran felt the roars of magical beasts coming from the depths of the forest. He immediately ordered everyone to rest in place until tomorrow. It would be time to make those creatures who wasted his time with Karina pay, just as Duke Miran was arranging the upcoming plan to slaughter the magical beasts. A magical beast Hetty walked out from the nearby forest. Seeing this, Miran wasn't afraid, but rather excited. "Great, it's delivering itself to our doorstep. This will advance our return time." Under Duke Miran's command, the well-trained knights quickly dispersed, instantly surrounding this lone magical beast. But just as Duke Miran thought victory was assured, the beast suddenly let out a cry of distress. Then the ground beneath everyone's feet suddenly began to shake. Pairs of eyes emitting a ghostly light appeared in the deep darkness. A pack of frenzied Hedis instantly surrounded Miran and the others. Among them, a young knight trembled with fear, since when did typically solitary magical beasts learn group tactics? He looked at Duke Miran, who was entangled in combat with a magical beast. Miran himself hadn't anticipated this either. Now all his retreat routes were blocked by these beasts, but fortunately with Karina's help earlier, he had already found the weakness of Hattie. As the sharp blade pierced into the monster's body, it instantly lost its life.